5 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Please note that this meeting has been extended till 6 p.m. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person, in the room, and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witness and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those online, please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For interpretation online, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I ask all participants to be careful when handling the earpieces in order to prevent feedback, which can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. Please speak only into the microphone that your headset is plugged into. A reminder that all comments are to be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand. Any technical issues arise, please inform me immediately so we can suspend. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 6th, the committee is continuing its study of free trade negotiations between Canada and Ecuador. For our first panel, we have with us today as an individual Thomas Chasson-Labelle, Assistant Professor, University of Ontario, by video conference. Then we have the Canadian Pork Council back to visit with us, Stephen Heckbert, Executive Director, and Renee Roy, Chair. Canadian Produce Marketing Association, Ron Lemaire, President. From Pulse Canada, we have Jeff English, Vice President, Marketing and Communications. Welcome to all of you, gentlemen. We will start with opening remarks.
Madam
up
Chair.
to 5 minutes, please. Then we will go with a round of questions. Excuse
Madam
me.
Chair,
yes?
if I could.
Yeah.
Before we begin the comments from our guests here, I just want to speak to my colleagues here with regards to the 5 motions which I had presented and had the clerk distribute on Friday evening. And if I could, in light of before the presentations take place, because I could be here for a while. Madam Chair, I have a lot to talk about. I want to give our witnesses the chance to fully present their findings, and if this hearing today doesn't preclude or doesn't go forward in its entirety, I feel we've wasted it. So I'd like to have these motions deliberated upon first in full before we go to comments. And if I could.
Well, just because there's 5 motions that you wish to speak to.
I will be doing it as the first round of questioning, Madam Chair. I'm going to be doing it right now or either in the first round of questioning. So I would prefer if I could, with the indulgence of yourself and my committee members, before we begin our final day of testimony and hearings regarding Canada's.
Can I just so we get it clear, Mr. Baldinelli? So we have 4 witnesses here now. We have the ambassador at 5 o'clock. So if your intent is to prevent the meeting from going forward and hearing these witnesses, then this was a study that we agreed to do.
No, my intent is I want to ensure that we deliberate and debate these motions. I don't want to preclude the fact that I may be cutting off these witnesses. I would prefer if we go through this entire day just debating my motions, that we have these witnesses return and then they can make their comments in full. I would hate for us to then just hear from them and then begin the rounds of discussions on my motion. So I would like to begin with that, have that undertaken, and then we can begin in full.
Well, it seems like it's disrespectful to the witnesses. You've got your motions tabled. Could we not possibly deal with those motions Thursday and not have witnesses on Thursday so that we could deal with your issue Thursday and go forward with our witnesses that we have now? It just seems unfair to the system that we have witnesses here ready to go, and and you don't have 1 motion, you have 5.
Yes, and my hope is to consider all 5 if needed today. My hope was, after reviewing my first motion, I could get consensus among the colleagues here in adoption of that motion. And if that's the case, then we can go straight into the comments from our witnesses. And so that's my hope, if I can just begin. I'd like to discuss the first motion, and if I can get some cooperation and agreement amongst the parties, and then we can begin our hearing. I'm not going to be taking this to Thursday. I'm going to be undertaking this now.
Well, it's just if it's going to take the entire afternoon, I just think it's unfair to the witnesses
Well,
to have them
it
here.
may
Then
not.
we should dismiss them.
Well, we don't know,
We don't know.
so.
So I'd like to first go forward with my motion and see what my committee colleagues suggest, and then we'll go to that vote on that motion. If not, then I'm going to be raising the second motion. But I hope with cooler heads and common sense, we'll be able to adopt the first motion that I put forward. And again, Madam Chair, I have the floor, and I'm not going to cede this opportunity. And so, again, before we begin our final day of testimony in hearings regarding Canada's intention to enter negotiations.
Which motion are you? There's 5 here. Make sure we are all on the same page.
I'm going to be talking about the motion that talks to amend our supply chain study. I believe it's number 5.
They're not numbered, unfortunately.
And then I'll read that into the record then, Madam Chair, with our change.
This one. Yeah, so
I'll do that.
go ahead and read it, and then
Yeah.
I'm going back to the committee to get what direction the committee wants to do
Yeah,
with this.
thank you.
right?
And
Okay?
again, like, before we begin the final day of testimony and hearings regarding Canada's intention to enter negotiations aimed at achieving a free trade agreement in Ecuador, I would like to bring forward my motions, which were sent to the committee on Friday for our consideration. Madam Chair, I will lead with the following motion, one which seeks to build on the current supply chain study, which we will return to following our examination of a possible free trade agreement between Canada and Ecuador, as well as the CARM study that we will be doing. In essence, this motion adds a Part C to the current motion for our supply chain study while keeping the remaining wording intact. As such, the motion will read that, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a comprehensive study to A, identify programs, tools, and measures that support the growth of Canadian businesses and their contributions to domestic and global supply chains, export abroad, and becoming integral players in various economic sectors. B, diversify and increase the presence of Canadian businesses in global markets, focusing on areas of competitive advantage and regional diversity of goods and services. And C, this is the part that I'm adding, Madam Chair, consider the ramifications of the ArriveCAN application and its impact on Canadian businesses, travel and tourism, as well as Canada's reputation as a travel destination for international visitors. That the committee hold a minimum of 6 meetings. This was in the previous motion, but again, it's a minimum of 6 meetings. That could be added to. And divided by regions in Canada, and that the committee report its comprehensive findings and recommendations to the House. Chair, I propose this motion given the recent development which has dominated the attention of this House with regards to the ArriveCAN application and its negative impacts on Canadians. And these impacts, concerns, and in many instances grievances have been long-standing and varied, not only incorporating supply chain difficulties faced by a business sector, but also, for example, in my community, the tourism industry, which is considered an export business. Colleagues, I first raised concerns with the implementation of the ArriveCAN application on December 7th of 2021 in a question I posed to the Public Safety Minister in the House. And I can read that into the record, and I will. But for now, I'd like to seek, if my colleagues have had a chance to examine the wording that I'm proposing and whether or not they had any comments on that and whether they would support.
Okay, I have Mr. Seaback, and then I have Mr. Cannings.
I just want to say that I think that Mr. Baldinelli's motion actually dovetails nicely on the study, because we are also going to be looking at CARM shortly. So this was ArriveCan was a program that was supposed to cost $80,000, ended up costing $60 million. We all know that it had incredible deficiencies in that program. If you were to analogize that actually to something that more people can relate to, for example, if you were to look at, you hired someone for $8,000 to repair your roof, and then they came and gave you the bill at the end of the day and said, here's your bill actually for $6 million. No one would put up with that. And to add on top of it, the roof leaks, and you find out that 75% of the people who allegedly are part of the invoice actually did no work on the roof, you probably wouldn't pay the invoice. So I think it's pertinent for us to look at this, especially in light of CARM, which we know is coming. And CARM, we understand, might have cost $400 million at this point. Maybe that was something that was cost $40,000 and is now at $400 million. So I think these are it's relevant to get to the bottom of what happened with the ArriveCan app, so that we don't have this happen with CARM, which would be incredibly detrimental to Canadian trade if it were to operate in any way, shape, or form like the efficiency of the ArriveCan app. So I think this is a reasonable motion that if the committee could support today, and then we can get on to the important business that we have with respect to this study.
Mr. Cannings, please.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, this is the one motion in the package that I can see that actually has anything to do with international trade. But unfortunately, we just did a study on the effects of ArriveCan on international trade, and we kept that to that topic. So I don't see any reason to go over that again. I would agree with the Conservative. This is a very serious sounding scandal, but it's already being studied in public accounts and government operations. I know because I've sat in on the OGO committee's deliberations on this. I don't think there's any reason at all for International Trade Committee to basically waste time that is being diligently done in other committees to get to the bottom of this. And I think we should just go to a vote and then move on and finish this study, because we've already studied ArriveCan and its effect on trade, and it's not our business to study the gory details behind this scandal. That's being done in public accounts and in government operations.
Mr. Sidhu.
Look, I want to apologize to the witnesses here today, and I think let's just go to a vote, and so we can hear from our witnesses today.
Okay, so we'll call the vote on the motion.
Discuss this if I could. I think just responding to my colleague, my NDP colleague. It is relevant to our committee. I mean, particularly for my riding, which depends on tourism. Tourism is an export industry. Let me, if I could. And in terms of the supply chain study that we're looking at, if we could examine, for instance, commercial traffic, about 76% of the commercial vehicles that cross our border cross at land border crossings. 4 of the main bridges into the United States are located in Ontario, and 2 of the busiest are in my riding alone. For example, when we look at supply chain issues, we were talking during the ArriveCan implementation, we were looking at bridge delays of over 2 hours. Commercial vehicles, businesses was interrupted. And my hope is that we can look at this so that we can come forward with recommendations, examine the previous recommendations that we had made, and ensure it doesn't happen. Again, tourism is an export industry. In 2019, for example, tourism was a $105 billion sector for the Canadian economy. Because of COVID, it shrank to $80 billion, Madam Chair. In my community alone, $2.5 billion in tax receipts are generated because of the tourism sector. It employs 40,000 people alone. COVID and this government's reaction to it through its fatally flawed ArriveCan put all of that at risk. And in fact, Madam Chair, if you look at the 2 years, 2021 and 2022, we can say that tourism suffered as regarding, or, because of COVID. Government's response in 2022 was horrific. They continued to stick to a fatally flawed ArriveCAN application when it wasn't required, and we lost a third tourism year. That third tourism year, the devastating results of that were self-inflicted, and they were self-inflicted because of the actions of this government, which denied businesses, again, we're talking about an export industry, which denied businesses the right to operate and compete and generate the revenues that they need to compete and succeed. We're only starting to see tourism recovery happen now, Madam Chair. That's only beginning now. Again, in communities such as myself, American visitation is at 80%. Domestic visitation, because of my location is a rubber tire market, is quite strong. But the tourism recovery in this country is uneven. We saw what in this past summer in places like British Columbia, because of forest fires, in Quebec, because of forest fires, the tourism economy was hampered. Not in communities such as myself, and we were lucky because of that. But it is an important aspect for us to consider and for us to study. And I think by including this as part of our supply chain agreement, or excuse me, our supply chain study, I think it dovetails nicely. And as my colleague, Mr. Seaback, talked about, it also not only dovetails nicely into our supply chain, but it also talks and references issues with regards to CARM. The recent Auditor General's report, which was devastating on the impact of this ArriveCAN app. The last recommendation, for example, and I'll just read it. The recommendation that the Auditor General had was this: that prior to releasing an application or any update, the Canada Border Services Agency should carry out and document its testing, as well as document results obtained by and any outstanding issues on the basis of the defined roles and responsibilities. The agency should also obtain release approval. And here's the response from the Canada Border Services Agency. And we'll be following up when we do this CARM study, but I think it's important. Their response was they agreed to this recommendation. The Vice President, Information, Science and Technology Branch recognizes that, given the constantly evolving pandemic environment and the requirement for 177 releases in 36 months, testing documentation was insufficient during ArriveCAN development. It was not feasible to complete all testing documentation as per existing procedures in this emergency environment. A procedure for streamlined testing documentation will be developed and implemented that will increase agility in emergency situations, while at the same time ensuring sufficient controls are in place to document testing results prior to release to production. In addition, the Information, Science and Technology Branch will review and update existing testing procedures to ensure control steps are introduced and documentation is complete before any system or application is released to production. These actions will be completed by June 2024. Madam Chair, one aspect for serious consideration is that CARM program is going to be implemented in May of 2024. So it will be incumbent on us in the next conversations that we have to ask government officials about their testing procedures. We're hearing significant stakeholder response saying they're not ready to move forward with CARM. And
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
No,
Where's the relevance?
I'm getting to supply chain. Because of that, and if they're not ready, what's going to happen at our border crossings? We're going to be seeing a supply chain issue that is unanticipated.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. I mean, we want to be respectful to our witnesses, and the member opposite said we'll go to a vote. We want to go to a vote. Let's get to a vote so we can move on and hear from our witnesses here today.
That's not a point of order. He has the floor.
I have the floor and I can continue, and I will continue, Madam Chair, for as long as I can. Again, this application had enormous impacts on my community, and that's why I'm here. Madam Chair, I first raised it on December 7th of 2021 in a question I posed to the Public Safety Minister in the House. Let me read this into the record. Mr. Speaker, as an MP with 4 border crossings in my riding, I can tell members that the ArriveCAN app has been a real mess. Take the example of Bernadette in my riding. she was forced into a 14-day quarantine when she is double vaccinated and had a booster. She's now receiving threatening phone calls harassing her to complete her testing requirements or face jail time and or a $650,000 fine. She's 75 years old. Madam Chair, 177 changes were required because of this application. 10,000 people were forced into quarantine, and that was in June of 2022, those 10,000 people. That doesn't even take into account what happened to poor Bernadette in my riding. So the issues were there, and this government was asleep at the switch. They didn't respond to the issues, going back to 2021 when we had issues. And this, if I can remind everybody, is before all the issues were found with regards to contracting practices. But in the time available, I'm going to be getting to that. Chair, when will this Liberal government fix the mess it created at the borders and rescind this unnecessary quarantine order against my constituent? That was the last question I asked to the government. That goes back to 2021. The sad reality is, Chair, the government took no steps to address the concerns that were being expressed. On quarantine orders, border delays, or the continuing escalating costs for an app, many were questioning why it was developed in the first place. Sadly, this government could have taken action, and action much sooner. On May 19th of 2022, my colleague, the member of Thornhill, tabled an opposition motion in the House for debate.
Excuse me, can I interrupt for just 1 second? My sense is that if you're going to want to have a vote on all 5 motions, I think it would be beneficial if we asked the witnesses if they would come back to the next meeting so that you can continue on with your 5 motions and we don't have to hold up. We also have the ambassador at 5. So we might as well let the witnesses come back on Thursday so that you can have your time to continue on with your motions.
We're going to be doing the motions, Madam Chair.
Well, if you're going to do the motions, complete disrespect for the witnesses.
Madam Chair, I apologize, but please, don't
we should
impugn my motive.
witnesses. I am not saying anything. If we're going to spend this meeting on doing these motions, as you choose, you table them. What I am suggesting is that we dismiss the witnesses and not have to have them sit and go through this, and they can come back on Thursday if their schedules would allow. And we would also have to advise the ambassador of the same thing. Yes, Mr. Arya.
I would like to apologize to the witnesses. You know, you came during your working hours, putting your time, money, and energy, helping the Parliament go through the process of developing legislations, developing agreements which are important to Canadians, individual Canadians, Canadian businesses, Canadian trade. At the end of the day, our prosperity is dependent on what we do, what your members do on the ground there, and what we do on your behalf. You have taken your time. I do sincerely apologize for this. This has been an unproductive day for you. Sorry about that.
All right, so is it an agreement with the committee, Mr. Cannings? Is it an agreement with the committee that we ask the witnesses to come back on Thursday? Because clearly we are going to be spending time here. So is that an agreement with everyone?
No, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, if this is going to come back again on Thursday, I think we'll be doing very much harm to the witnesses to give up their work and come here, sit, and make them go through the same thing again. It's very unproductive. I think it's also disrespectful if you ask them to come back again and they have to go through the same process.
Okay. I had a list before I interrupted Mr. Baldinelli, in fairness here. I have Mr. Sabar Tremblay, Sadu, and Mayo.
Oui, ben en fait, mes commentaires vont plus.
Well, I agree with Mr. Canning. Now, I understand Mr. Baldinelli's concerns and the upshot that this might have on tourism. When we discussed this back in May or June, I stressed the fact that this link was difficult to establish between our committee's mandate and the tourism industry, and it was agreed that we'd change the wording to talk more about trade, but most of the witnesses ended up talking about tourism. The study came about, there were undeniable consequences, there were delay tactics, which were problematic, and there were other negative and adverse effects on the tourism sector. Obviously, the app was an irritant for many Canadians and Quebecers. But the fact of the matter is that we know what the ramifications of the app were. The study was carried out. The app then became optional. It was no longer mandatory. And that's to a large part thanks to our work here. Let's be proud of it. But it's no longer a scandal for the industry. It's an ethical, financial scandal that has to do with the awarding and management of contracts. So I really don't think we need to rehash a study with the same witnesses that are going to tell us the same thing. This problem is now in other people's hands.
Okay, Mr. Sidhu.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I know we want to get to our next study. I believe it's CARM. We heard about how important CARM is to the member opposite, and delaying CARM by another couple of days is not going to be beneficial to industry experts, and we have those witnesses, I believe, lined up as well. So this is impacting not just our witnesses here today, but it's going to impact our witnesses for the next 2 or 3 days. So I believe we need to either go to a vote, get through this, so we can hear from our witnesses today. I think we need to be mindful for their time today as well.
Mr. Meow? I've got you down next. I'm sorry, I had a... Yeah,
And then you interrupted him to say,
Yes.
should we dismiss? And now we're in some weird speaking chamber.
Well, no.
It's either they're either letting the witnesses go or not, and then we're back to Mr. Baldinelli.
Yes.
It's not a new round of talking.
But if they have something to comment as to whether or not the witnesses should go or not go or whatever, then I need to give them a minute to have the floor. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Meow.
So, Madam Chair, I know in the past committees we've discussed the importance of the study, especially with the free trade agreement with Ecuador, and that's why all our witnesses are here today. We shouldn't take up too much of their time because it's important work that our NDP had put forward this motion. And of course, member opposite mentioned about the CARM study and also incorporating the additional point to my motion. And I think let's not take this time up for them and just move on and call a vote, whatever it is. Let's do this important work. Thank you.
Mr. Seaback, before I go back to Mr. Baldinelli.
No, I was on the list to speak after Mr. Baldinelli. Mr. Baldinelli still has the floor to speak to his motion.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my colleague for allowing me to continue. Are we now, Madam Chair, going to discharge our witnesses?
Committee to do that, so you continue on, and until we can have a vote on these items. Let's vote on it.
Well, Madam Chair, I still have the floor.
Well, then continue.
Again, the issue with regards to ArriveCan, its deficiencies, its impact, its devastating economic impacts, not only on our commercial trade corridors, but also on our tourism economy, goes back as early as 2021. And again, I first raised that issue in December 7th, 2021, with regards to the issues impacting my one constituent. Sadly, the government could have taken action, and action much sooner, to rectify the problems. And we could have avoided everything and those devastating comments in the Auditor General's report that we're seeing today. Unfortunately, that didn't occur. On May 19th of 2022, Madam Chair, my colleague, the member of Thornhill, tabled an opposition motion in the House of Commons for debate. Given the importance of the tourism industry in my community, I naturally devoted time to this topic and delivered the following remarks. Madam Speaker, I will be splitting my time with the member for South Surrey White Rock, It's an honor for me to rise in my place today to speak about the pressing issues facing Canadians and international travelers entering and exiting through Canada's various ports of entry, including airports, land borders, bridge border crossings, and even CBSA marine reporting sites for small vessels. My honourable colleague from Thornhill has brought forward an excellent and timely motion today, one which I will be fully supporting. Ultimately calls on the government to immediately revert to pre-pandemic rules and service levels for travel. In short, the Liberal government's outdated COVID-19 protocols at airports and other international ports of entry are causing extreme delays, lineups, bottlenecks, and misconnections. Again, we're talking supply chain issues. Worst of all, they are acting as a disincentive for those wishing to travel to Canada. While the focus of our opposition motion today is on airports, it's very important and relevant that other international ports of entry are mentioned, included as well, because they are all connected in our economic ecosystem. These ports of entry support businesses and economic opportunities in many sectors, including tourism, which is very important in my riding, as we have the city of Niagara Falls and the towns of Niagara-on-the-Lake and Fort Erie. My Niagara Falls riding has 4 international border crossings. They are managed by the Niagara Falls Bridge Commission and the Buffalo and Fort Erie Peace Bridge Authority, respectively. These are the Lewiston-Queenston Bridge, the Whirlpool Rapids Bridge, the Rainbow Bridge, and the Peace Bridge. All have been hit hard by a 2-year pandemic, and the federal government has done nothing to support these bridges, despite the heavy hardship of lost traffic due to extended border closures, supply chain issues. One of the biggest issues I hear about at our international bridge crossings is that of backlogs and delays being caused by the ArriveCan app. In an email from March 24, 2022, the general manager of the Buffalo and Fort Erie Peace Bridge Authority warned local politicians that their analysis showed that continued mandatory use of the ArriveCan app would result in much longer processing times and lengthy border waits, which would significantly depress cross-border traffic at a time when we were moving into the 2022 summer tourism season. Fast forward 2 months, and here we are. His prediction was right. I raised this issue with the federal government as soon as I could. What did it do to prepare for these border backups? It doubled down and decided to spend $25 million more in budget 2022 to continue to support the mandatory use of this application. Again, Madam Chair, the government in 2022 doubled down and spent another $25 million on an app they knew didn't work as early as 2021. And in fact, because of the Auditor General's report, we know, and the government cannot get, the government has yet to provide additional documentation. We know it could be up to $60 million and perhaps even more. So that's why we're here today. That's why we're trying to get this added to our supply chain study. And I'll continue with what I said then. Along my border community riding, there are a number of CBSA marine reporting sites for small vessels. They include the Niagara-on-the-Lake Sailing Club, the Smuggler's Cove Boat Club, Greater Niagara Boating Club, Millers Creek Marina, Birdie Boating Club, and the Buffalo Canoe Club, amongst others. Out of all these sites I just listed, only one is operational. Millers Creek in the Upper Niagara River and Fort Erie is open, but all the other sites are closed. Members can imagine, if someone is boating on the Lower Niagara River and Niagara-on-the-Lake, they would have to travel all the way to Port Weller and St. Catharines to report in with CBSA. If they are on the Upper Niagara River but closer to Chippewa and Niagara Falls, then they have to travel all the way to Fort Erie and all the way back just to report in with CBSA. This adds many kilometers to a voyage and is a huge waste of time and money for boaters, especially as fuel prices skyrocket to record highs. These closures are a huge issue for local recreational boaters, especially as we approach the May long weekend and enter the summer boating season. We need the government to reopen all sites immediately. There is no time to waste. Yet, government refused to act. Tourism businesses in my riding were hit first. They were hit the hardest, and they will take the longest to recover from COVID-19. The effect these failing Liberal policies are having on our boaters will only make recovery take that much longer. Tourist businesses in Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake, and Fort Erie depend on domestic and international visitors traveling to our communities, spending their time in dollars, and enjoying all that Niagara has to offer. The operation of attractions, historic sites, restaurants, wineries, craft breweries, cideries, casinos, and many other businesses depend on this visitation. Think about this again. $105 billion, the tourism economy in 2019. Of that, Niagara alone generated $2.5 billion in receipts. In Budget 2021, this federal government provided an economic package of $100 billion for a sector that generated, no, excuse me, I believe it's $101 million, when in fact Niagara generates $2.5 billion alone. In communities such as Niagara, international visitation is important. While they make up approximately 25% of our total visitor base, these international visitors account for over 50% of the dollars spent in our tourism communities. This spend helps support over 40,000 jobs that are reliant on a strong tourism industry, which we had in Niagara before this pandemic. That is why it is essential we welcome back our international friends, guests, and visitors. That starts by giving them a great, quick, and efficient experience at our international ports of entry. No one is going to choose Canada as a travel vacation destination if they have to risk waiting hours upon hours in stressful and frustrating lineups at an airport or a border crossing. Economic damage and missed opportunities are already being incurred. As the world reopens from COVID and other countries lift their restrictions, Canada looks to be stuck in the past and out of touch with reality. For example, the European Union and the United States have dropped their mask mandates for passengers on flights and in airports. As countries around the world are reducing red tape and making it easier for citizens to travel again, the Liberals in Ottawa continue to impose their outdated and unjustified mandates, which are leading to longer lines and slower recovery. As an example, fully vaccinated travelers arriving in Canada are still subjected to random COVID-19 testing, and in some cases, these travelers are not even told they have been selected until they get a surprise automated phone call or an email a few days later from Switch Health. This happened to Catherine and her daughter, two constituents of mine. On May 10th, they had an uneventful Nexus border crossings at the Blue Water Bridge in Sarnia. They were never informed that they were selected for random testing, nor were they given a random test on their exit from the Nexus inspection. 3 days later, they received multiple phone calls and emails from Switch Health warning them to get a day one random test or else risk contravening a public health order with severe penalties, including fines upwards of tens of thousands of dollars and a mandatory quarantine. It seems illogical for people to be told they have to take a random test and then wait for Switch Health to send it to them by courier so they can complete it a few days, if not weeks later. How is this in the best public health interest of Canadians? Simply put, the incompetence of this government knows no bounds. Again, the Auditor General's report details 177 changes were made to this app, Madam Chair. Many experts have called for the end of these ridiculous requirements. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has called for a step back to improve regulations in order for Canada to become more competitive. The President of the Canadian Airports Council has called for the removal of legacy public health protocols, noting that mandatory testing is leading to bottlenecks and hurting Canada's competitiveness. Again, a supply chain issue. These requirements are stifling our hard-hit tourism industry and are leading to long delays for Canadians just looking to travel after a long 2 years of obeying government-induced lockdown measures. All of these terrible travel experiences at our airports and border crossings are hurting Canada's economy, competitiveness, and international global reputation as a top tourist destination. Since the world started reopening months ago, Canada has lagged far behind our international tourism destination competitors due to these bad federal government policies. On a scale this large, every port of entry across our country is negatively impacted, and this ripple effect negatively impacts every riding of the House of Commons, especially those like Niagara Falls, that depend on tourism as a major economic driver. We all benefit from a strong tourism economy, and we all lose when it is weak and chaotic, like it is now. After 2 long years of government shutdowns, lockdowns, border closures, and stringent travel restrictions, many tourist businesses in my riding are counting on a significant rebound this summer. Unfortunately, due to these travel measures and issues at airports and borders, government policy is working to stifle rather than support an urgently needed recovery in our tourism economy in 2022. Through their lack of preparedness to keep Canadians safe and preserve our economic best interests, the Liberals and NDP are abdicating their responsibility to govern. In my opinion, before COVID, Canada was the best place to visit and vacation. We can get back to being the best, and we should strive for nothing less. But we have a lot of work ahead of us, and it starts with the objective of this motion, which is to get the federal government to immediately revert to pre-pandemic rules and service levels for travel. Niagara badly needs to achieve economic recovery this summer, and that is simply not going to happen if ArriveCAN and other federal travel and health restrictions continue at our airports and borders. It seems as though everybody wants to achieve economic recovery from this pandemic and return to normalcy, everyone except the Liberal NDP government. But it should know there is still time to save the 2022 tourism season if it acts quickly, and it should start by supporting today's common sense and timely motion. The opposition parties, Madam Chair, sadly voted against this motion, including those 2 Liberal members from Niagara. That did not stop those on the Conservative side from again asking tough questions. In fact, on June 2nd, 2022, I asked the government this question. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 allocates $25 million to the continued mandatory use of the ArriveCAN app, yet it failed to extend important tourism recovery programs for businesses that still needed the help. The government has been warned that the ArriveCAN app is impacting travel to Canada. What is more important to the Liberal NDP government? Funding ArriveCAN, which clogs up our borders and deters visits, or scrapping this app to help achieve tourism recovery in Niagara and throughout Canada? Unfortunately, the government continued its approach of being one of obstinance. A special transport committee hearing was later held on August 19th, 2022, and I had the opportunity to pose these questions to the transport minister at the time. And I said, Minister, a Canadian traveler recently left this public comment on TripAdvisor. Just got back from a trip to Nevada, flying out of Buffalo, and I'm from Ontario. The airport is a dream. No lineups, quick through TSA checkpoints. The airport is super clean. Quick drive over to the airport. No COVID testing required. Crossing across the U.S. border is easy. They only ask if you are vaccinated and do not ask to see your test. I have crossed 3 times in the past 2 months. Same thing every time. Coming back across the border at the Rainbow Bridge, there were about 10 cars in front of us, and it took forever to get to the booth. So anyone thinking of ditching Pearson Airport and traveling down to Buffalo, do it. It's worth it. So I said, Minister, Niagara Falls is the #1 tourism leisure destination in all of Canada, yet every taxpayer dollar that Destination Canada spends in international markets, including our prime market, the United States, for our border communities, is being wasted by headlines that continually hit the press talking about Pearson Airport being the worst airport in the world. My colleagues just mentioned this. 60 countries around the world have abandoned all air traffic pandemic restrictions, including most of our European allies. Why does this government continue to cling to these restrictions, which only do a disservice and disincentivize travel to this country? I later remarked, there are over 40,000 people in my community who work in the tourism sector, and they're being impacted. We've lost 2 tourism years because of COVID. This year, if we lose it, it's self-inflicted, and there's nobody to blame but the Liberal government. When are you going to take action? Followed by a response to the minister where I asked, who told you, Minister, that the ArriveCAN is not having any impact on wait times. So upset was I of the response, I simply stated to the former transport minister, and I quote, "Minister, they're going to hold a parade for you in Buffalo. Their Chamber of Commerce is going to hold a parade for you," end quote. Finally, when the government acted, I provided this statement in the House on October 24th, 2022. Again, Madam Chair, we're talking about this being raised in May, prior to the tourism season beginning, and the government failed to take action. They failed to act until the tourism season was over. You've got to remember, 75% of that tourism income is generated in an 8-month period. And what the government did was preclude those businesses from the opportunity they themselves wanted. They didn't want government assistance. They didn't want government programs. They wanted to be open to do what it is they do best, which is to welcome visitors from throughout the world. Again, we're an export industry, tourism. 105 billion dollars, dropped down to 80. Their goal now is to get back up to $130 billion as a sector. And what is it that we can do? Stop putting impediments in their own way of growth. So again, I had to comment. We're going back to 2022. And finally, when the government made its announcement that it was ending restrictions, I said this in the House on October 24th. Less than 1 month after the election, the federal Liberals threw in the towel and gave up on defending the disastrous ArriveCan app. For many months, medical experts have told MPs that ArriveCan could have been scrapped as early as this past spring. Instead, the Liberals held on and continued its mandatory use through the summer of 2022, crushing any chance for an economic recovery for our hardest-hit tourism sector. Not only did this useless app cost Canadians tens of millions of wasted taxpayers' dollars, it also cost our economy untold billions of dollars in lost tourism revenue. Before the pandemic, the Canadian tourism industry was valued at $105 billion. Today, it's down to $80 billion, largely because of failed liberal pandemic policies.
Point of order.
Like the mandatory use of
Excuse me for
ArriveCan.
1 second.
Point of order,
Point of
and
order.
Chair, I appreciate the opportunity just to raise this point of order because I arrived slightly late, but I fully understand that we were going to hear from these witnesses from, and there's some Ecuadorian witnesses coming. We have the ambassador coming. I understand that Mr. Baldinelli is trying to motivate his motion, but we've been listening here for quite some time. I think we all have understood what the motion is. We have it before us. So I'm just saying, point of order, the relevancy needs to, be concise to moving the motion so that we can vote on it, whether or not we study this. And that is when, this kind of information would be placed. But right now, we and the public was informed that we'd be studying Mr. Canning's motion on Ecuador. So thank you. I look for your ruling.
If you would please keep to the points in the motion itself, Mr. Baldinelli, as much as possible. The tourism section in 22 is very different than the tourism section in 23 as far as numbers, so we don't want to mislead people.
I'm going back and indicating that this government could have taken actions, Madam Chair. Instead, it put in place an app that I believe was in effect for over 885 days, which
Works
had
very
devastating, well, Madam Chair, I've got the floor.
Yes.
Had devastating consequences on our tourism economy, which you must remember is an export industry. And not only did it have devastating impacts on our tourism economy, it had devastating impacts on the supply chains. Again, I have two of the 4 busiest land border crossings in all of Canada, and they came to a standstill because of the impacts of ArriveCan. That needs to be studied. That's why I put forward this motion to add our examination of the impacts of ArriveCan onto supply chain. I think it's a very fair motion that I put forward. I believe we've even held, 3 of the 6 meetings? We've asked as a minimum 6 meetings for supply chain I'm just asking that this committee examine as part of that study the issues with regards to ArriveCan and its impact on supply chains. So, Madam Chair, it is entirely relevant for me to be here. It is entirely relevant for me to put forward this motion, and I will never apologize for defending the interests of those hardworking people in my riding, which were devastated. The number of businesses that were lost, small businesses, mom and pop shops that had to close because of the actions of this government when they knew they could have taken actions to end the implementation of ArriveCan earlier. But their obstinance caused the loss of businesses and hurt the economy. We are only now beginning the process of recovery. In fact, my community is quite fortunate in that it is a rubber tire market in a sense, that it is recovering. But that recovery is uneven across the country. And in fact, we've got the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada having their International Indigenous Tourism Conference right now. This government, did you know, in the budget of 2022, their only announcement with regards to tourism funding was $20 million to our Indigenous tourism partners. Why did it take over 500 days for the government to fund at least $10 million to the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada? How do you treat your partners like that, Madam Chair? You don't treat your partners like that. And so, Madam Chair...
Again, point of order, if we're going to get into like the facts, the Conservatives voted against, in the December 2023 marathon, Indigenous tourism funding. They voted against
Let him
Tourism
finish his
Assistance
point.
Fund. They voted against the Canada Economic Development Tourism Growth Program for the prairies. They voted against the Canadian Northern Economic Development
Don't let
Ages and
him
Tourism
finish
Growth
his
Program.
point,
This
and then
is
we're
this is a
back to
fact.
you.
That all the funding for this year that's supporting tourism as it's finally growing again was voted against by the Conservative government. We're getting into debate. I'm making a point that we should vote on this and discuss it further, because also they voted against FedDev, the tourism funding for FedDev for Southern Ontario. They voted against FedNorth funding for Northern Ontario. And I worked in the tourism industry, and I was speaking to them last week. It's growing again, but they need that funding that was voted against by the Conservative government. So we're getting into debate.
Is the committee ready to vote on this motion?
I've not ceded the floor.
Okay, then it's back to you. Have a good time.
To my colleague's point, let's just look at the government funding. 2021, the government provided $500 million over 2 years in funding for tourism sector. What are they providing now? It's 108 over 3. They provided $50 million to Destination Canada.
In 2021, you voted against $500 million for tourism relief fund and $108 million for tourism growth fund in 2023.
If I could. You've provided $50 million over 3 years to
voted
Destination
consistently
Canada.
against tourism
Destination
funding.
Canada's budget's gone from a high of $157 million
voted against
down to
tourism funding.
111.
You can't have it both
Funding for
ways.
Destination
Try and
Canada.
be
It's liberal
accurate.
math, Madam
Mr.
Chair. It's
No,
liberal
it's
math.
not liberal
and again,
math. We have
that's
the
the
books.
treatment of the tourism
Let's
community,
have-
which suffers because of
Let's
this
not
liberal
have
math.
disinformation. Let's try and be accurate.
It is accurate, Madam Chair. Those figures
In
are...
your mind,
are-
maybe, but
This
others
feels like a
just-
filibuster. Well, we should get to
You're
the
just
point and vote
filibustering.
on
You're
it.
going to do it the whole afternoon, so keep on going now. We'll vote now or we'll vote later. Keep on going.
Sooner without ridiculous interruptions.
Well, when the misinformation is the point that Mr. Sheehan is raising, okay?
The chair should be using
Yes.
the term misinformation.
Well,
It's completely
that's what's being
inappropriate.
said
Madam
from,
Chair,
that's
I'll
what's
put my
being,
figures up against that gentleman's at any time. And when I vote against their budget allocations, I'm voting for my constituents to remove this government from office because of their ineptitude. They have destroyed the Canadian economy. They have...
In spite of the tourism industry.
you're not talking about the motion whatsoever. Get back on focus here, Mr. Baldinelli.
And I will do that. Thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chair. So again, before the pandemic, the Canadian tourism industry was valued at $105 billion. Today, it is down to $80 billion, largely because of failed Liberal pandemic policies, like the mandatory use of ArriveCan. At a time when many economists are predicting rough waters ahead for the Canadian economy, the Liberals continue to waste precious taxpayer money on this useless app. Like a bad dream, which never ceases to end, Despite the end of the mandatory use of ArriveCan, a new issue, the more scandalous than it was issues, which continues to dominate our time and attention today, is the spending that has been involved with regards to ArriveCan. We must learn and ensure it never happens again. In comments I made to the House last fall, November 1st, 2023, I indicated a lot happened during the COVID-19 pandemic in Canada, which stretched over 3 years from 2020 to 2022. It was a time when the Liberal government tried to give itself full spending authority without any opposition scrutiny. This was in the spring of 2020. Then the Liberal government thought it was a good idea to prorogue Parliament in the middle of a raging global pandemic later that summer. After more than a year of social distancing, public health restrictions, masking, and vaccines, the hypocritical Liberal government plunged the country then into a pandemic election. It is truly unthinkable if one goes back to look at it. However, for the Liberals, it never been about good and sound policy. It was always and always has been about politics. That is why we are here this evening, unfortunately, to discuss another disastrous Liberal policy objective, which did little to protect Canadians during the pandemic and almost single-handedly ruined any chance of a tourism recovery in 2022. We have since covered a wide range of topics and issues impacting Canadian trade when I was appointed to the Standing Committee on International Trade in February of 2022. While some people might not realize this, tourism has important elements of trade as an export industry. When COVID-19 hit our country, tourism was hit first and hardest. We all knew early on that it would take the longest to recover. When we fast-forwarded more than 3 years since the federal government agreed to close our international borders, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are still being felt in many parts of Canada's tourism economy. Recovery is not equal. Some areas are recovering more quickly than others, particularly those in rural, remote, and northern communities. Further, thousands of tourism operators across the country continue to struggle with high levels of debt after taking out pandemic loans through no fault of their own and with a tourism visitation base that simply has not returned to be as strong as it was before COVID. Domestically, Canadians are now scaling back their spending and travel plans, impacted by stubborn inflation, increasing carbon taxes, and higher interest rates, which makes everything more expensive and life more unaffordable. Internationally, visitors are simply not coming as they did before COVID. After 8 years under this Liberal Prime Minister, Canada's tourism reputation has been damaged, and our country's overall tourism economy has lost its competitive edge to other countries. For reasons many related to the Liberal mismanagement of our tourism economy, visitors are simply not making Canada their destination of choice as they once did. The reputational impacts on Canada's tourism industry that were caused by the mandatory use of the ArriveCan app should not be downplayed or ignored. When this dysfunctional, and at this time, this was last year, $54 million app was made mandatory for anyone entering Canada, the issues faced by travelers were countless. Moreover, the issues were being faced by just about every person trying to arrive here at every point of entry, ranging from major airports to land borders and international bridge crossings. My riding of Niagara Falls, again, I repeated this because it's huge for my community, is the #1 leisure tourism destination in Canada, employing over 40,000 tourism workers. Before the pandemic, it generated over $2.1 billion in tourism receipts. My riding includes, again, the City of Niagara Falls, the town of Fort Erie, and the town of Niagara Lake. As a border riding, we have 4 international bridge crossings with at least 1 bridge in each municipality. From day one, simply put, the ArriveCan app was an utter failure. Its impact were so severe that I felt compelled to bring forward a motion to study this issue at our International Trade Committee. Upon agreement, we undertook the study, which eventually produced the 6th report, along with the motion and the amendment that we are debating here today. While I sincerely appreciate our committee's work on producing this report, the fact is the new and very troubling information about ArriveCan has surfaced beyond its astronomical price tag, which now stands at approximately $54 million. These issues should be of great concern to all parliamentarians, partisan politics aside. I think this is important, Madam Chair. I raised the concerns about the scandalous spending habits going back to November 1st, 2023, and at that time it was $54 million. And I said this again, these issues should be of great concern to all parliamentarians, partisan politics aside, no matter one's political stripe. New allegations of misconduct, including identity theft, forged resumes, contractual theft, fraudulent billing, price fixing, and collusion involving contracts, ghost contractors, and senior bureaucrats have emerged. Canadian taxpayers deserve answers. I look forward to hearing from my colleague, the member from Calgary-Mindapore, as she expands on some of these shocking revelations. There is a reason we now call the app and its implications Arrive Scam. Given that new information about ArriveCan that we simply cannot ignore has come to light, it is only reasonable to support this amendment to the motion to extend the ArriveCan study to get to the bottom of these issues. As badly as the Liberal NDP coalition wants to move on and forget about its mistakes, bad decision-making and reckless spending, there is still a lot of unfinished business to take care of from the pandemic years, and the ArriveCan app absolutely must be included in this. Madam Chair, I said this November 1st of 2023. Those comments are relevant today. That is why I have put forward this motion that we include study of the ArriveCan app as part of our supply chain study. I'll finish off those comments that I had said a year ago, almost. I see a trend growing here. Whether it is the refusal to review $15.5 billion in potentially ineligible pandemic wage benefit payments because it's not worth the effort, wasting more than $600 million on a risky pandemic election, or not caring that $54 million was required to develop the dysfunctional ArriveCan app. The reckless and wasteful NDP Liberal coalition has become far too complacent with the tax dollars of hardworking Canadians. It must realize it has a spending addiction that is costing Canadians and the country dearly. It is our job as the opposition to hold this government to account. That is why I support my colleague's amendment to the motion to amend the sixth report to include reference to the $54 million of hard-earned Canadian tax dollars wasted on the application, the inaccurate evidence government officials provided during the committee's investigation, the serious allegations of fraudulent contract practices, and the statements made by the RCMP that it is investigating criminality in the contracts that were awarded. Now the Auditor General wants to update Canadians on where all the money went. This, again, these statements were made November 1st, 2023, and yet here we are. Again, the opposition members in the NDP and Bloc, as well as the Liberals, voted against that. Canadians deserve answers. The people of Niagara deserve answers. This government's obstinance in removing the application until the fall of 2022 denied tourism recovery to those in my community and throughout Canada who are looking for it so badly. To add insult to injury, it is a government that feigned interest in responding to the concerns of our tourism community and simply did not care to ensure that hard-working Canadian taxpayer dollars would be protected. Instead, we are now continually bombarded by scandalous revelations on how an application could have been developed over a weekend wound up costing Canadians $54 million. After 8 years in office, the tired and inept government and Prime Minister are not worth the cost. Let us give Canadians the answers they deserve. It is simply the common sense thing to do. And the shocking results of the Auditor General's report must be followed up on to ensure it never happens again. How is this relevant to us, the members of the International Trade Committee? For one, because we will immediately begin work on another study, another CBSA digitization project, CARM, which will have major impacts and ramifications for our import, export, and brokerage sectors, impacting our supply chains. Let me just read this, and I believe it is the last, again, recommendation from the Auditor General's report, and it dealt with testing. And I believe I've already read it into the record. But I think it's important to do so now because it is important for our next study. And again, it impacts the supply chain issues that we will be facing. We've heard great concerns from stakeholders, and there will be coming forward in the next several weeks and days to come forward to express their concerns. But we could have some enormous bottlenecks at our border crossings that one has never envisioned. And again, the last recommendation deals with testing. Prior to releasing, this is the recommendation from the Auditor General, prior to releasing an application or an update that Canada...
Mr. Cannings, you've got a point, or?
Yeah, we're approaching 5 o'clock, and so I'm just wondering about the ambassador, whether we should abandon.
Well, when at 5 o'clock comes, when I will be in a position to dismiss and thank the witnesses for being here, and I would have to, if the committee wants to hear the ambassador, but if this continues, there's no sense keeping the ambassador, tying the ambassador's time
I would
up.
just like to know if we are envisioning hearing from the ambassador today, and if not, when.
If not, I think it should be the very next available meeting, which would be Thursday's meeting that we possibly have. I don't know, I have to ask that question. Yes, Mr. Ari.
Madam Chair, on the point Mr. Cannings made, we cannot assume that the witnesses will be available on Thursday. Even if they are available, I am not sure whether we should put them through the same unproductive thing that they have faced today. They're all hardworking on behalf of their members, on behalf of their business, and for Canadian economy. And, we can pass legislation only with the volunteer support of Canadians like them, who take their time, money, and effort to guide us, to give their inputs, their suggestions into formulating the various legislations that are there to benefit Canadians. And I don't want us to put them through the same thing again if this is what is going to be expected.
If we could ask the members that are witnesses about their availability for Thursday?
Again, Madam Chair, it's not the availability. It is
Yes, I
our
realize
duty whether we
Madame
can
la Présidente,
even
on peut vous
invite
laisser
them.
poser votre question.
Madam Chair, if you can ask your question of the witnesses, perhaps?
So I'm looking at the witnesses, and I said, if you are available to come back on Thursday? I apologize for the problems
Unfortunately,
today.
Madam Chair, I'm booked back to back all day Thursday.
Okay, well, apologies.
We may be able to make it, but probably not in person.
Okay, Mr. English?
Would be the same. Virtual would be an option.
And to our ambassador, would you be available Thursday, sir? Oh, sir. Mr. Chasson-Lebel, would you be available
Oui.
Thursday, sir?
Oui, je pourrais me rendre disponible.
Yes, in the same time slot, I imagine.
Be the same time slot, sir.
Oui, je me rendrai disponible.
Yes, I'll make myself available.
All right, so we would try to have our witnesses come back on Thursday, either by virtual or in person. And to the ambassador, he's available. And the ambassador is available on Thursday. So is the agreement then we will resume on Thursday in person or virtual with these witnesses and the ambassador to follow as was on the record for today. All right, that's what we're doing. Everybody's okay, or that's what we're doing then, okay? So I would suggest the witnesses, at this point, it's 8 minutes to 5 according to that clock. If you would like to leave, you're free to leave, or you can stay and enjoy the messaging. Whatever you would choose, it's up to you.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair,
Tremblay.
Écoutez, je trouve ça.
well, I think it's great that the Conservatives are enjoying themselves here. They've messed up the meeting and they're having fun and it shows just how much of a circus this is. But that said, you've invited the witnesses to stay, but if they do decide to leave and then this finishes, well, what's going to happen to their testimony. They won't miss out on doing it in the future. They can come back if they wish. But were this filibustering to end, well, I want the witnesses to know that they won't be penalised. They will have an opportunity, if they do decide to leave, to come back on Thursday. Another issue, how is it that the notice of meeting stated up until the meeting would last until 6 p.m? I imagine it was to give more time to the ambassador. Now, if there isn't going to be no testimony, can't we finish at our normal time, 5:30, please?
Certainly will, because if our witnesses leave and then our ambassador, we did that specifically in order to ensure the ambassador had a full hour. That he would have the ambassador will have a full hour on Thursday. It'll be till 6 p.m. Tonight's meeting will end at 5:30, which is our normal time. So, do I need to suspend? Can the witnesses leave if they choose?
Up to you. If the committee would like to suspend for a moment, they can.
Does the committee want to suspend for a moment while the witnesses leave, or the witnesses are free to get up and leave? Or stay? I mean, listen, you can pay money for this if you like, and you can't get that much entertainment. So, okay, thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Baldinelli, you have the floor.
Oh, we're suspended briefly.
I didn't suspend. Oh, I did not suspend, guys. I want you to have the floor, so I wouldn't want you to get tired. So let's go.
I'm here
Let's
all
go.
week. Madam Chair, I'll continue, and just as I
Keep
I was
going. Don't
concluding
take too
here.
much of a breath, because I have Mr. Meow and Mr. Seaback that want to get on the list here too. So please continue.
Yep.
Otherwise, I will call someone. Speak.
Thank you, Madam
Otherwise,
Chair.
I'm going over there.
And the shocking results of the audit, well, let me finish up by just saying, as we get back to how it all ties into why we're doing this now, and based on the Auditor General's report. I said, and the shocking results of this Auditor General's report must be followed up on to ensure it never happens again. How is this relevant to us, the members of International Trade Committee? For one, because we will immediately begin working on a study of another CBSA digitization project, CARM, which will have major impacts and ramifications on our import, export, and brokerage sectors, impacting our supply chains. That's why I believe it's relevant. That's why I asked that it be added to the supply chain study. And again, we're not asking for the 6 meetings to be expanded upon. We're just saying that Arrive can also be examined as part of those that 6-day study window. And so I think it's a reasonable request, Madam Chair. And with that, I will conclude my comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really feel bad for a witness who came here today. And hearing from the member opposite talking about his motion, and there's a lot of things that is misleading Canadians, because I represent the riding of Richmond Centre, which is also airport riding. And with what we see now, it's completely different from what he has talked about. And I'm not going to take up too much time, but I'd like to request to adjourn the debate.
Mr. Meow has moved to adjourn the debate. Okay. Do you want a recorded vote?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mr.
Okay.
Arya.
Yes.
Mr. Algapra.
Yes.
Mr. Meow.
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu.
Yes.
Madame Fortier.
Oui.
Mr. Baldinelli.
I guess I was here on time.
Mr. Baldinelli.
No.
No.
Mr. Genereux.
No.
Monsieur Martel.
Non.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Ok, oui.
Mr. Seaback.
No.
Mr. Cannings.
Yes. Yes.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4.
Yeah, okay. So,
So the debate's being adjourned.
And so I'm going to adjourn the meeting at this point. Our witnesses have...
Mr. Baldinelli, the floor?
Madam Chair, I also have another motion I'd like to forward.
It's 5 o'clock. So, I'm gonna, can I just
So
adjourn the meeting?
I think Mr. Baldinelli would like the floor.
I'll introduce the motion. If my colleague wants to speak to it, and we can
Oh,
vote on it.
is that the same one?
This
is
is
that a
this is a second motion that I have, that I had put forward. And I can read it into,
So you don't want to have a vote on the one you just spoke to for the last hour and a half?
you just adjourned.
Yes, I adjourned debate, so we can't do that one, so we'll go on to another one. Which
Yes.
one would you like?
Madam Chair, if I could, I'll read it into the record.
Hold on, yeah. Identify which one, because we have so many.
Well, it deals with Arrive Can.
They all deal with it.
It has the September 18th, 2023 date in there.
It's number 5.
It would have been identified as 5 in the package that had been sent out. Yeah. So if I can read it? That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study to review the government response dated September 18, 2023 to the study concerning the ArriveCan digital tool, impacts on certain Canadian sectors, and in light of recent findings about ArriveCan revealed by the Auditor General of Canada, ensure that the government's response to this study remain relevant and that the government takes immediate actions to ensure future applications impacting trade, travel, and tourism are fully costed, budgeted, procured, and accountable so that this scandalous, wasteful spending never happens again, and that this committee reports its findings and recommendations to the House.
I have Manny, and then I have Mr. Seaback. Well, as soon as we started this, you put your hand up. I can strike you off and go to Mr. Seaback very easily.
Madam Speaker, I move to adjourn the meeting today.
The meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. We need a recorded vote on that? Okay. Okay.
Mr. Arya.
Point of order, Madam Chair. In his opening, in his statement, he said Mr. Seaback's going to speak to it, and I had my hand up to speak to it, so I should have been the first person recognized to speak to it, not Mr. Sidhu.
Before just as Mr. Baldinelli went to introduce number 5, Mr. Sidhu had put his arm up to speak right at the very first word you used. So that's why I wrote that name down, and then I put Mr. Seaback. I did not put Mr. Seaback because he put his arm up, not because you mentioned that he was going to be. Okay?
So the Liberals on the committee are going to adjourn the meeting rather than have votes on ArriveCan and the impact it's going to have on trade. So effectively, the cover-up continues
Mr. Seaback,
at another
we
committee.
have started the process of a vote.
This is
So we
typical
have-
of the List Liberal government.
It is
They try
not.
and shut down debate at committees on issues that are relevant to Canadians. So what Canadians are going to witness
Okay,
right
Mr.
now
Point of order, the member
is
has the
they're
floor.
shutting down the
You're out
committee
of
meeting.
order,
They're
Mr.
shutting down
Seaback.
the committee meeting so that we can't actually have a vote to look into the ArriveCan app. This is your Liberal government in action.
There are 25 other committees looking at it, and the Ethics Commissioner and the Auditor. It was going to be so thoroughly looked at. We will welcome the report that it comes back. We're taking a vote on adjourning the meeting.
Mr. Arya.
Yes.
Madame Fortier.
Oui.
Mr. Miao.
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu.
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan. Mr. Baldinelli.
No.
Mr. Generou.
No.
Monsieur Martel.
No.
Mr. Seaback.
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Oui.
Mr. Cannings.
Yes.
Okay. Meeting adjourned.